Hey everyone, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of people in my network. So these are great leads. I'll be interviewing on these books. And I want to know and I want to learn from them which book it is that's provided the best impact, the most impact, contributing to who they are, the value they create, the leader they are, the business person they are, whatever it is that contributes that best value to their life. And in this particular series, I cover three categories of books. The first category, one that I haven't read that they're schooling me on. The second, that we both read, whether specifically for this episode or for the series, or whether we've read it before the series itself. And then the third category is having the authors or publishers of books that have been out there making the rounds. In this particular episode, I will be interviewing the author of the book. So for this episode, my guest will be Gramps Jeffrey. Gramps Jeffrey is the pen name for Mark Joseph, whose first book, The Secrets to Retailing: How to Beat Wal-Mart, was written to help entrepreneurs and small businesses compete against the big guys. Ariana Huffington read his book and asked him to contribute to the Huffington Post. And so he's written over 100 articles about small businesses, education, the homeless, and several other nonprofit topics dear to all of us. Gramps and his lovely wife, Kathy, live in Scottsdale, Arizona, where two of his grandchildren live. Two more live in Austin, Texas, and two more live in Orlando. That's great. That I love that the family's incorporated in that bio all over the U.S. And I met Gramps when he reached out, having heard about the series, what I was trying to achieve. Wanted to share some information and give the same kind of background and just the lessons that he shared in his book. So I wanted to get to know him. We talked back and forth. I saw what he was all about, the lens that he can provide to each of us just based on the experience of his life, the different careers that he's had, his entrepreneurial career. So I wanted him to sit down with me, and here we are. So Gramps, thank you so much for joining me.
I appreciate the invitation. I enjoy to be on here.
So, Gramps, I gave that brief bio, and I always try to keep them brief just so we can dive into the meat of the person's career, their life, whatever it may be. So, why don't you tell me a little bit about what you're up to today? What is it that you're carrying out, whether in your business or current writing or anything like that?
I have turned into a children's book writer. And the reason I did that was, living this past year because of the pandemic caused by COVID-19, in isolation, except for being able to be with my family, gave me a special time to kind of watch and interact with these grandkids that you referred to. I got to tell you what a trip that was because all six of these kids have different personalities. The one thing they do have in common is their sense of curiosity, and how excited they get when they do accomplish something. Watching them grow year to year and how they interact with each other really is the basis of my children's book. Was I Don't Want to Turn Three. It's the name of the book. What goes through a toddler's mind when the parents are so desperate to understand. When does a toddler understand the difference between me and us? The book explores how a whole family finds this out together. So, going back through my career and so forth, as a baby boomer, trying to understand how the world has evolved since I was 3 years old, it's also kind of part of the story. My parents, they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have cable TV. They didn't have remotes. I was my dad's remote. He said, "Son, go change the channel." I was the remote.
Yeah.
My parents' definition of discipline is quite different from the parents of today. Has today's world made for a better place for children to grow up? I'll let your listeners kind of answer that question. As you kind of weigh how you were treated growing up on how we're treating our kids today. So that's kind of what this whole book is about: is the adventures of a family going from 2 to 3, and then 3 to 4 and 5, and so forth. So that's my latest adventure myself.
So, Gramps, throughout your career, what kind of work were you doing in terms of your entrepreneurship? You reference assisting uh, other entrepreneurs, small businesses. What kind of work were you doing before you became an author?
Well, I really started my career when I was in my 20s in the department store business.
Okay.
Back in the 70s and 80s when the department stores were a hot thing. So I got into retailing. I went from the department store business into the off-price business, into the specialty business. And then the manufacturing and things like that. So my early career was corporate. That's what I did. But I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And so I finally made that leap and I got out of the corporate business and I started a couple businesses. One was a chain of hair salons. I sold that to investors, and the other is a company that I took public that became the premier business-to-business site on the internet. We sold case quantity to small businesses all around the world, shipping to all 50 states, around 40 countries. Our customer base are the moms and the pops for surviving, thriving as the chains. So that's when I got involved when, back in the early 2000s and so forth, when we were really pushing to help entrepreneurs survive what was going on in this world. That's when I wrote my book, The Secrets of Retailing, How to Beat Walmart. And the reason I wrote the book was I was getting like 30 phone calls a day from customers saying, how do I do this? What do I do that? So the book basically is I've got a copy of it here if you want to look at it. The book is basically a step-by-step guide on how to open a business, how to run a business. And so there's 15 different chapters in the book: how to hire your people, find your location, where to find your products, how to market your business online, how to market your business traditionally. And the last chapter, chapter 15, is how to exit your business, how to sell it, how to get rid of it. So I wrote that book, but I really wrote it for our customer base so that
Mhm.
help them understand, what they do once they're up and running.
So what is it's interesting when I speak to authors or I speak to any kind of professional on this series where they may go into a particular field, a particular trade, a particular whatever it may be area of the workforce or the business force. Yours is more the entrepreneurial spirit, right? So it's not, I don't think you're focused, hyper focused on any particular industry. It seems like you're just driven by just getting things off the ground, right? Or I mean, obviously retail, but retail can be so many different things. So when I ask people, okay, what from your past drove you into being a doctor, being a lawyer? Can you point back to something in your youth where, whether it was family, relatives, whether it was friends, whether it was environment, a teacher, education, what was it that got you started with that entrepreneurial spirit, that go-getter attitude? Do you remember anything that kind of triggered that mentality?
Yeah, I come from a family of entrepreneurs. All right. And so, when I was a little kid, they happened to be in the scrap business of all businesses. But it happened that my mother's family was in the scrap business, my father's family was in the scrap business. And so all of a sudden, this was the entrepreneurs. So, as a little kid, I was working every summer and every vacation in this business. And finally, I decided that even though my family's entrepreneurial, I need to go do my own thing. I needed to figure out what I really want to do. And that's how I got involved in the corporate world. But it's interesting, you mentioned something earlier, right before the question here, was, that you concentrate on the business and entrepreneurs. But businesses change. And I'll give you an example of what happened with our business. You know, we started this business to help small and medium-sized businesses and entrepreneurs get going. And so that's how we started this business on the internet. And we became pretty dominant. We had thousands and thousands of keywords and phrases that were organically, which means they were naturally ranked 1, 2, and 3 in all kinds of different categories. So what happened was when Katrina hit, if you remember that back in 2005 and 6, that all of a sudden, because we were so dominant on the internet, we were getting calls from churches and schools who wanted to find products to help the people in Mississippi and Louisiana. So all of a sudden, we were selling underwear and socks and toothpaste and toothbrushes. And then when they opened up the trailers, we were doing all the kitchen supplies and the bedroom supplies and bathroom supplies. And all of a sudden, it opened up our eyes that there's a whole underserved market out there that could use our products, because nonprofits would come to us to buy their goods because they could buy more goods and stretch their dollars and help more people. And so that helped us evolve. And if you take that as a lesson, that for entrepreneurs and small businesses, always keep your eyes out. Always look for something different, because you may have the greatest idea, but it has to evolve many times. And so that's one lesson that any listeners will do. Just always look, always keep in mind, be broad in what you're looking for, because your greatest customer could come from where you don't even know it. And today it's much different than it was 40 years ago. 40 years ago, you open up a business and you open up in your small town or your town, and your customer base is the people around you. They come into your store, they come into your business, they pick up the phone, you're in the phone book. But in today's world, where you can be a small business person, not only service the people in your town, you can service people all over the world. To me, this is the best time in our history to become an entrepreneur because you've got that opportunity to really reach out and find so many customers that you could never find 34 years ago.
Yeah. I mean, it's a global reach. I mean, even if it's not a good in service, I mean, even this podcast, the majority of the people that I've interviewed, I haven't even met in person. The majority of the people I've interviewed, the podcast, the actual episode that I recorded with them was the first time we spoke face to face. So we'd meet on LinkedIn or whatever networking group that everything's virtual. Most of everything's virtual during the pandemic. And you reach out, you have similar ideas, and you're like, okay, can I interview you? So it's just amazing the reach that you have. And I couldn't have done that without, I think that comes up so often, the time in history that we're in, just the accessibility that is there for the taking if we're curious enough to actually look for it and utilize it.
Yes. And so we also have to keep in mind, and that's another reason I wrote this children's book is I don't want to turn three, is this newest and greatest generation that's coming up is the best ever. It's going to be. I mean, as soon as they come out of the womb, they're exposed to the internet and they're exposed to iPhones and to all kinds of screens. Now, I didn't get involved into the internet until I was 40 years old. I mean, this whole generation, as soon as they're so much smarter than we are. And so, we as adults and parents and grandparents, we have to be able to balance all this great technology that they're learning with the real world things. And that's why we as generations right now have got to get involved in raising these kids because take that great things that they're learning on the technology and because technology is there to help you achieve your goals. We have to teach our children how to set goals and use that technology. And so that's why one of the reasons I wrote this book too is to get people involved and let's get involved in raising these kids.
That's such a good point. And it's something that's come up recently with me just because I have young kids, a 6-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a baby that was just born a month ago. And it's come up a lot where, you talk to your friends and you realize how different this generation has it than my generation, than your generation. That my kid has cartoons on demand. He knows which service to go to see which episode that he loves of a cartoon. Meanwhile, when I was in high school, I'd have to go home, watch MTV, and wait for the video to pop up that I wanted to watch. Now I just go to YouTube and I can watch it however many times I want. So there's something about that instant gratification. But you bring up a good point where I'm like, okay, when my kid gets to a certain age, it's like, how do I balance the access, the instant gratification with living a life that's not driven by those things. It's like, okay, so I don't even want to pontificate on that. What do you think? I don't know if it's a lesson in the book. Why don't we go into the book and we'll get back to this conversation, I swear, because I'm curious. I want to pick your brain on it. But you had this time with your grandchildren. So what led to the theme of this particular book? I don't want to turn three, which I
Well,
can relate to, but I want to hear what you think, what it is that drove you to this particular premise of the book.
it really, when you're watching 2 and 3 and 4-year-old kids, they have trouble sharing. They have trouble communicating, because everything is it's me versus us. So the real theme of this book is at what age do we begin to take responsibility for our actions? Is it 3 years old? Is it 13 years old? Is it 23 years old? I'm a baby boomer. I got plenty of 63-year-old that still don't take responsibility for their actions. Yeah. So that's the real theme of this book is when does it happen and how can parents influence that?
So what are your thoughts?
Well, the one thing
And then you
that
don't have to give away too much of the book if it's in the book. But I, I got you at the right time because I've been thinking about this a lot because I have that 3-year-old and I have the one that's coming up behind them. So I'm curious, like what you think of that.
well the major influence that we can do immediately is we got to get our kids into reading. And we got to get them, we got to get them sit there down and starting to read because they're on the screens, they're doing that. But we've got to take that, and there's all kinds of benefits to reading to children. If you kind of picture you get a little child sitting on your lap, the first thing that happens when you get them for 20 minutes while you're reading a book is, you create a bonding. There's a nice time to spend together, just you and them. It's a bonding situation. So that helps right away, again, getting them out of this crazy world that they're in. And another reason that we as adults, and I'm looking at all my grandparents out there, make sure you get involved with these kids, is that it supports listening skills. Now, you and I both know that the most important skill that we have adopted over these years is our listening skills. I mean, think about it. You're a podcaster. You've got to have listening skills. You've got to understand, before you, if you're in sales, you have to have listening skills before you do anything. So if we can embed to our little kids when they're 2, 3, and 4 years old by reading a book, taking that time, it creates these listening skills. It just requires them to listen when they're reading a book. So that's another reason why we have to take time to read books to these kids. Another reason is it's the cognitive and language development. There's plenty of words in these books that they don't understand. I mean, there's plenty of words I don't understand. I got to look them up. But there are words, so it gives you a chance to just talk to them, explain what these words mean. Really explore with them. All different things as the two of you are they're sitting on your lap. And another reason that we need to read books to our kids and make sure it's a part of your routine every single night is because of the attention span it creates. Little kids, as you well know, having a couple of them that they're running around, they run around all day long. They bounce off the walls all day long. You got them sitting in your lap for 20 minutes. It helps with key concentration, self-discipline. So it's these attention span that does that. So I would encourage any of your listeners that have children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews, make sure that part of their routine every single day is sitting down and reading books because that helps offset everything else that they're doing in their lives.
Gramps, how many books have you written?
I've written a couple books. I've written lots of articles, but I've written a couple books. The first one, obviously, was the business book. The second one is, I don't want to turn 3. I'm working on my third one. Is I don't want to turn 4. You know,
Yeah.
and in fact, my granddaughter Olivia, who is part of the book, all the kids are part of this book. She just turned 9, and she came to me last week. She says, "Gramps, I got a great idea for our next book." She says, uh, and I said, "Oh yeah, what is it?" She says, "I don't want to turn 10." I said, "What do you mean you don't want to turn 10?" She says, "Well, I got to start worrying here about driving a car." I said, "That's 7 years away. Why are you worrying about it now?" She said, "Well, I'm getting worried about it." She says, "And I got to start thinking about a college, where I'm going to go to college." I said, "That's 9 years away. Why are you worrying about it?" She says, "I just very worried about it." So she wants us to write a book. I don't want to turn 10. But if you think about it, I don't want to turn 20. I don't want to turn 40. I don't want to turn 70. There's all
Yeah.
kinds of things in our lives that, we look back on and do we want to be where we are now or do we really want to go into the future? So that's my next series of books.
So, Gramps, what kind of parallels do you draw between watching the way that your grandchildren are developing and the workplace and the business place? You know what I mean? Because you said you have some people your age that, don't have the attention span or whatever it was you had mentioned about the parallels between, because I find like when I'm coaching, it's amazing that the lessons of leadership are the same from when you're in pre-K all the way to when you're a senior executive. It's just the language that changes. So are there any, and I'm sorry to catch you off balance with this question, but what kind of parallels do you see between your grandkids or your experience with any kids at all and the workplace and the business place or the businesses that you've helped?
Well, the first thing that's interesting about kids that are 2, 3, and 4 is they're very honest. They are not tainted at all. So they will tell you, like my granddaughter Grace, who just turned 3. I was at her birthday party in Austin, Texas, a couple months ago, you know, and she looks at me and she says, "Boy, Gramps, you got a big belly." I said, "Yeah, what do you mean I got a big belly?" I said, "Is it bigger than your dad?" She says, "Yeah, you got a big belly." Now, anybody in my life gonna tell me that? No, it's gonna be coming from my granddaughter. And she, because they are very honest. And the other thing to do is they repeat everything that you say and do. You are the role model. You as a grandparent, they just imitate you. If you are on your cell phone 20 hours a day, that's what they're going to think is the way it should be. You know, for example, if you say a cuss word in front of your child, I can guarantee you're going to hear that 4 more times that day. Obviously the best way to do is to offset it by things they like blueberries and dinosaurs and bananas right after you say it. But you're going to hear that so many more times. So, they are very honest, and we lose that as we grow up. We lose that as we begin to open up businesses and so forth. So
Yeah.
that's just one example of the changes. Another example would be that, little kids 2, 3, and 4, they fight over things. It's all about them. They do not know how to share. And obviously that's one of the main things we have to teach them. But take a look at that when you're in a workplace environment. You know, can your people share? Are they stabbing each other in the back? Are they working as a team? How do you get them to work as a team? That's a very difficult thing. How do you get your people to work as a team? I mean, eventually, by the end of my book, they were working as a team, these little kids. But how does that happen in real life when you're in your 20s, 30s, and 40s? Can you work as a team? And so there's lots of little things that happen when you're 2, 3, and 4 that are foreshadowing of what you could be as you grow up.
Yeah, in fact, one of my presentations as a leadership coach has been one of the more requested ones once it got out there that I was doing it was like my the top 10 lessons that I learned from my greatest leadership coach, my toddler at the time, one of my sons. And it had to do with what you were talking about, how honest they are, um, how they don't forget. You know what I mean? So if somebody comes around and they're the person that always has candy, they're the person that always has candy. If an adult comes around and they're the grumpy one, they remember that's the grumpy adult. And all these lessons transfer to when we're adults. So be careful how, listen to your intuition, understand how people make you feel. It's like be truthful. Don't be curious. That's the top one. If you've mentioned that perfectly so many times. Um, be curious, that wonderment that we lose as we grow out of our youth. And it's amazing. I've said this before, but it's amazing how when I work with clients and they get to a place where they're more relaxed, more fulfilled, more happy in their career, it's when they've reached back and remembered who they were when they were younger, what they wanted, like that sense of just wonderment, enchantment with the world around them, that they weren't just sticking to a script. Obviously, the work, the business has to get done, but we give up so much of who we are. As you said, we kind of become programmed um, in our youth. Now your granddaughter's already thinking of the license and the college. She's already kind of following that script that you hope that she doesn't lose. Um, just everything we've talked about, that curiosity, that wonderment, that um, wanting to go for what's hers. Like you have to be selfish to some extent, selfish to get what you want, what you need without taking from others. But there's just such a bridge that gets crossed where we leave all the great attributes behind, and we can recover them later if we pay attention. But there's just so much that we lose as we go through our careers and our adulthood.
Yeah, we need to create the curiosity that builds imaginations. That's what we need to do. You mentioned about memories. Can you remember? Do you have great memories of your grandparents? Is there something that happened when you were a child that is still with you today?
Yeah, I mean, they were in a different country. I've only seen them maybe 3 times, but the first time that I met them, I was like 7 or 8. I remember annoying my grandfather, visiting him. Like, yeah, I remember specific events, specific moments, specific comments. Yeah, I mean, it's just vivid.
Yeah, it's amazing how we can influence this. And unfortunately, in today's world, 30% of grandparents are, we call them remote, which they're just not involved with raising their kids, the grandkids. They may see them on a birthday or call them on a birthday or see them at a holiday, but they're just not involved. That's one out of every three of my baby boomer generation that they're like, I raise my kids, let them take care of it. I'm going to live my own life. So that's something that we've got to pull back and get our grandparents more involved because these memories, like you talked about, are so important. But they can also create bad memories. I mean, I'll give you an example. I had my two grandkids here 2 weekends ago because their parents went off to Las Vegas for a weekend. So we had them. We had a great time. We had, we watched all the great. We have we played the tennis, and we were here in Arizona, went swimming, we went to the museum, we went to the park, we did all the great things the grandparents do. But on Saturday night, Levi, who just turned 7, his grandmother said, "You better eat this food or you're not going to be able to watch television." He's not going to eat this food. I'm not going to do this. And so the next day we gave him back to the parents, and the parents said, "Well, what'd you do?" And Olivia said, "Oh, we had a great time. I played soccer. We had the Wii, 20-year-old Wii on our TV. We played that. We did all these fun things with the grandparents." The only thing Levi said to his parents was, "Grandma made me eat something I don't like." And I can tell you, when he's 40 years old, he's going to remember that. So we create those memories too. And so that's something we just got to be careful of, is how we handle it. And because we all have those things inside us for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, I completely I love your stories that you tell, and just it reminds me it just really does take a village. And I love that there is that one additional degree, the grandparents, or that one additional degree, aunts and uncles that are vested in getting this kid. When I just went to my sister's yesterday, my mom's house. They will correct my kid if he's out of line. They don't look to me and wait for me. Like, that's just our culture, where it's kind of like the whole family is involved in raising that kid. But I like the fact, especially with you saying that this generation is going to be like the smartest generation because that they have that instant access to everything. I love the exposure that they get from being with their grandparents, because it is a different generation that grew up in that different generation. And there's just so much that your generation can share with them about a time before any of this BS with technology took place, where you had to build relationships by talking to each other. It most times it will be the grandparents that say, "No, I don't wanna text. No, I don't wanna email. I'd rather just call you or see you in person." So it's like it brings all these traditional, which should be standard lessons forward, so that none of that is forgotten. 'Cause I can admit, like, some of my generation maybe forgets the importance and the quality of having those face-to-face conversations, really building relationships. We get lost in social media and the likes and the engagements and the followers without building those real traditional, now it's traditional, those real unique relationships. And that's what life is all about. All of life, whether you're in family, in the workplace, in business, in teaching, whatever it is, it's all about relationships.
Now, keep in mind that it's necessary for us to teach our children how to think, not what to think. We
Yes.
have to teach them how to think. And going back to reading books, obviously there's 100 books out there. Well, everybody wants to read my book, but we all have 20 books laying around the house. So whenever you're reading a book, again teaching them how to think, let the kid pick out the book. Let them come to the book with you, so they have an instant. They're part of it right off the bat. And before you even sit down and read the book with them, again, teaching them how to think, ask them, what do you think is going to happen in this book? Start the conversation there about thinking. And then as you're reading the book, ask them about, well, who are the characters in this book? What is the setting? Can you relate to that? Does anything in this book sound familiar to you? Again, teaching them how to think. Let them. The book can do that. They can pull that out because there's interaction between you and them. And then, much like you should be doing every night at dinner time with your kids, when you ask them, well, how'd your day go, and what you learned, what was your favorite part of this book, and why
Mhm.
was it your favorite part? So we have to, as adults, we have to teach our children how to think because they're going to figure out what to think on their own.
That's such a great point. Just to get them into that behavior, that habit of just picking apart their life, even it's curious that you brought up, or great that you brought up, the difference between the discipline of a previous generation versus the discipline of this generation. My parents were from a different country, which the discipline was different, the household was different. They came here for a better life, so it was all about the work. My sister and I were just talking yesterday, where because of the language barrier, my parents didn't help us with homework, never. Um, but it's just I appreciate the fact so much that yeah, that we can just kind of, me as a new parent, that I experienced it with them, what it's like not to have that, and then understand the importance of it today, because I've probably had more conversations with my kid at 6 than my dad had with me, and it was more about, this was a different culture, he didn't understand it, he didn't know the language too well, but I appreciate that input where, just the way that we guide their thinking. Not that we have to tell them what to think, but or how to think, but to get that process of thinking, and curiosity about everything around them, getting that going.
Yeah, let's talk about the evolution of discipline. You know, when I was growing up, I grew up in the 50s and 60s. And my parents were part of the greatest generation ever because they're the ones that went through the Depression. They're the ones that won World War II. That whole generation is very disciplined, and rightfully so. I mean, they deserved it. They saved the world. And so, when my brother Larry and I were bad, and my mother would say, "Wait till your dad gets home." And he would come home and he'd whip off his belt and he would chase us around the kitchen table, and that was discipline. Then he had a fraternity paddle that he kept in his closet and used obviously every once in a while. And there was one night when they weren't there. We grew up in Ohio, and it was in late fall and a lot of leaves on the ground. So we took his fraternity paddle and we put it under the pile of leaves, and then it snowed the next night. And
Oh.
we went back to look for it in the spring. It was gone. That was a miracle. It was like, wow, we maybe have solved this problem. So then we obviously learning from that, we use time out with our kids and talk to our kids and really, try to get them to discipline. And now that generation, which is you, are now disciplining their kids. And I've seen it with my daughters. They put them in the timeout. A kid doesn't like to be in a corner all by themselves. They're else playing, looking at the wall. So that's one way of discipline. Another way I thought was great. I was telling you, it was Grace's birthday party a couple months ago. The She'd gotten a bunch of trucks for her birthday, and her brother, who was 4.5, they were starting to fight over the trucks. And she looks at him and she says to him, "I need my space." And she actually goes to one side of the sofa, and he looks at her and he says, "I need my space too." And he goes to the other side. Well, they didn't learn that on the internet, and they didn't learn that, through electronic device. I am sure their mother got so frustrated one day and looked at both of them and says, "I need my space." But they learned from it. And that's the way we're disciplined today. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. And as the generation before me, it's interesting that when my son does something, or he raises his voice, or he's disrespectful, or he talks back, and I kind of give him the eyebrow, I kind of give him the look that runs in my family. Like, if you're pissed off, you give a look, just a look, and that's all it takes. I swear I got that from my mom. Um, but it's almost like scaring him, or I'll tell him to go sit down or whatever. And then I look at my mom and she's like, "You got to be more easy on him. He's just a boy." I'm like, where was that mentality? Where was that mentality when I was a kid? I love how that happens, where grandparents are, yeah, they're obviously for obvious reasons, but they're softer with the grandchildren than they were with their kids. So that's interesting how it just shifts. There's just so many changes, so many evolutions just from everything going on in the world. It's just such a different world. I mean, the world looks completely different than it just did 5 years ago, with so much going on, with so much connectivity. You mentioned the war. I mean, there's a war going on across the world. and I don't know how it was during the Depression or the World Wars or how long it took to get, you'd get what? Newspapers, you'd get headlines. Now you get TikTok feeds and Twitter feeds and all the news stations are over there and you can access live cameras all throughout. It's just it's such a different world.
Don't lose sight that we all make a lot of mistakes as we grow older. But every generation, I mean, every decade, we get a little smarter, we get a little wiser, and we get that because of all the mistakes we have made. So I am sure in your mother's case, as we get older, we learn from what we didn't do well. And that's where she's coming from.
Yeah, I love that. So Gramps, if it's not I'm curious if it's not a next well, you will be doing the next children's book, but if it's not a children's book in the future or in addition to the children's book, what kind of other book would you write?
Well, my first book was The Secrets of Retailing: How to Beat Walmart. I'm thinking about writing one, The Secrets of the Internet: How to Beat Amazon.
Ugh, I think people would be dying to get their hands on that book. What do you think of that compared to, when you were coming up as a kid and just seeing what retail looked like then compared to what it is now? Let me just get your quick take on that. What do you take away from that comparison to, 50s and 60s to the instant, you know, access that you have to anything you need?
Again, I think this is the greatest time to be an entrepreneur. Back in the 20 years ago, if you wanted to open a business, you had to buy a location, you had to hire people, you had to put money. I mean, it's very expensive. But today, if you're an entrepreneur or a small business person and you want to try something, then the internet's the way to go quickly because you can sell on Amazon, on Etsy, there's all kinds of different vehicles online that you can sell your products on, and it doesn't cost you a lot. You don't have a lot of people, a lot of money tied up in inventory. You don't have a lot of people with the money tied up in people. So you've got all of these advantages today. So if I was to open up a business, this is what I would do. I would go right in because there are so many niches that are still untapped that you can go after. And again, going back to what we originally talked about, your market is now wide open. You're not just talking to the people in your neighborhood. Your market is wide open. So any entrepreneurs, if you've been afraid to take the chance for whatever reason, do it now.
And yeah, we went in so many different directions because I was curious and dragged you in different directions. But without giving too much away about the book, is there a brief overview or path of the story that you can provide for I don't want to turn 3? Like what can somebody expect? And I know children's stories are typically shorter. I don't want you to give too much away, but what can someone expect if they read it?
No, it's okay. It's only 32 pages, so anybody can read it in 20 minutes, because they're sitting on your lap with the child. So you should be
Yeah,
able to read
yeah.
it in 20 minutes. But what really happens is the influence of the father with these kids is so important. And step back, you're a father. Do you have the influence? Do you take charge? Do you let your wife take charge? How can the father really take charge? So the father is the one who puts all these kids together. But what's interesting is one of the children are the ones that come up with a solution. And the solution is that all of these toys that Jordan has stolen from all of his cousins and all these gifts that they are going to give them to the homeless kids downtown. And that comes up, and this is a true story. This book is a true story. This is,
Oh, okay.
if you take a look at the book, all the pictures in the book are pictures that I took of these kids, and I sent them over to the illustrator to put them in a cartoon machine. But this is a pretty true story. So Olivia's class she came up with the idea that we should give everything to the homeless kids downtown. And so that's how basically the book ends. But it really is an adventure of a family where the father is very involved, and the kids learn to share. And so that's basically just the ideas of the book.
Yeah, and I appreciate you reaching out to me to discuss the book just because as I face my own journey of whether it's coaching or this particular podcast, um, the more people I talk to, I realize how much and it's common knowledge that our childhoods impact our lives, who we become. But in talking to people, you really realize from hearing their stories just how much little seeds that were planted in childhood and the way they approached life, or they were surrounded by family or not, friends or not, really guided them down the path that they took to get to who they are. So I'm just more and more I'm fascinated. And now you took it even younger because I was thinking like grade school. I was fascinated with what takes place there. And I guess I also did with the toddler presentation I mentioned, but yeah, even a children's book, there's lessons to be learned in there. So I appreciate you reaching out to discuss this book.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me.
And Gramps, if there's anything, is there anything you want to share before we wrap up?
Oh, you can buy the book on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or come to my site, grampsjeffrey.com, or I don't want to turn 3.com. Or if any of your listeners want to continue this conversation, please email me at grampsjeffrey@gmail.com. I'd love to keep talking.
Absolutely. When I post this, I'll list all your information. You're a busy guy. I saw the signature in your email and you have like all the social media. You're more active than I am. I mean, you're getting busy with this. You're staying busy with this.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It really is.
In any case, Gramps, thank you so much for sitting down with me and taking the time to cover I Don't Want to Turn 3.
Thank you. Bye bye.
So for anybody else, if there's anything that I might have missed that I could have asked Gramps that I missed just because we're limited on time, and I know I take the conversation in different directions if I hear a particular thing that draws me into a tangent, let me know or reach out to him. Again, I'll share his information wherever I post this. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you everybody for listening and take care. Bye.